So today we're going to be talking about Duality, which is a game on Roblox. It's a psychological horror game, and it contains a lot of mental health discussion. So if that makes you comfortable, feel free to click off. We'll see you next time. Love you all. Alright, let's get into it. Bye-bye. Hello, my dears. So, as we just went over in that little disclaimer, Duality is a psychological horror game on Roblox. It follows the story of this guy named Roy, who we are drawing this in this little speed paint. It's my own design of him, and you can see his picture on the side there in my little reference window. But the game follows the story of Roy, who you play as. In the story, he had just moved to this new town about 2 months ago. Later, finding out that this is because after his father passed away, his mother started acting out and just generally feeling like a not as safe person to be around, so he left. Um, over during his time in Blocks Hill, which is where he is now, he hasn't made a whole lot of friends, nor has he explored much, but he's made these two friends named Dave and Zach, or at least he thinks they're friends. We soon find out that these people don't really see him as friends, as a friend. Whoa, these people don't really see him as a friend. They just hang out with him out of pity because everyone else thinks that he's really weird. And we hear them talking about him in a very negative light uh, in this grocery store, where the shopkeeper, Lewis, tells us that he can hear our friends talking about us in a not so kind way. And when Roy overhears this conversation, it sends him spiraling a bit, because originally he thought that Roy and not Roy, that Dave and Zach were the only people that genuinely saw him as a friend and not just a weird kid. This sends him back down a bit of a spiral, and when he gets home and goes to sleep, we experience the first nightmare. I'm not really gonna explain what the nightmares are because I think they're really interesting, and I think you should play, and it's a lot more fun to go through the nightmares when you're playing for the first time. So, yeah, I think you should. So I'm not really gonna explain the nightmares much, but yeah. Um, when we get to the next day, everything seems relatively normal. He seems like he's doing pretty alright, but during class we get a cutscene where Roy ends up having a pretty bad anxiety attack during class. After which, on his way back home, all of the residents have blanked out faces and you can't interact with them like you could the day before. Um, After which, when you get home, you experience the second dream, which, again, I won't explain because I think it's better if you experience it yourself. So if you want to know how the dreams go, you'll just have to find out yourself. But the next day, when Roy wakes up, he's spiraling bad. The whole world is darker and more grayscaled. The sky is even darker. Um, he can't interact with anyone. And as he's walking out, he walks almost direct. He almost gets hit by a car walking through the road. Luckily for him, someone is there to help him. We meet a new character who has saved Roy from getting hit in the street, who reveals himself to be named Andy. Andy immediately starts checking in on Roy, saying that he was pretty worried about him, saying that it was a pretty close call, which, yeah, it was, and mentioning that he looked pretty out of it and looked like he hasn't eaten the past few days, which is accurate, he hasn't. And they immediately start talking, mostly on Andy's behalf. Um, Eventually, Andy convinces him to go out to get pizza with him, so they go down to the restaurant in their town and have a nice chat and get to know each other better while eating pizza in the local restaurant. After which, they head out. As they're heading out, they run into one of Andy's friends named Cloak, who is also relatively nice and seems very accepting and welcoming of Roy, saying that any friend of Andy, whoa, saying any friend of Andy's is an ally. Roy seems relatively comfortable with these people, as much as he's a little anxious because meeting new people has never been his strong suit. After he gets to know them better and goes home, he seems genuinely happy to be around them, although he's not quite sure if he's ready to accept them as new friends into his life after everything that happened with Dave and Zach. Although we'll talk a little bit about what happens while the player is on the way back to Roy's house. If you talk to Limey during this phase, one of the characters that sells lemonade, um, oh, Roy and Limey will have a deep conversation about whether things are always meant to be or not, and who is and isn't meant to be in your life forever. Limey tells him that not everything is meant to be forever, and sometimes you just have to wait for the right people to come into your life. And Roy responds with, "But what if I never meet the right people? What if my people never come?" Limey responds to him by saying that everyone's people eventually comes. You just have to know when to take the right shot and be observant of what will and won't be good for you long term. And and make sure not to well, make sure to try and not be too upset about it when if it turns out that the people you thought were good for you turn out to be enemies in disguise. Roy seems to take this conversation with him very well, and after talking with Andy and Cloak, his perspective on the world has changed a lot. Interacting with items in the house gives a bit of a different perspective. You can talk to one of his neighbors, and when she genuinely asks him for his opinion and wants an answer, he's relatively shocked that someone is actually paying attention to what he has to say. And overall, the world has gone back to its normal colorful ways, just like it was before. You then experience the third dream, which is the first non-nightmare in the game, reflecting how Andy and Cloak's appearance has made a big effect on him. Well, has had a really big impact on him, and when he wakes up, he decides that he finally decides that he wants to have Andy and Cloak in his life permanently. And that is where the game leaves off for now. It is still a work in progress game under development, and the people behind it are honestly really cool, and you should definitely check out the game yourself to support them. Now, let's talk about the symbolism behind everything. Obviously, a lot of the symbolism is in the dreams, so we will be getting into them a little bit, but not nearly as much as you would figure out about them from actually playing the game yourself. Let's start with dissecting Zach and Dave. Alright, here we go. When you first talk to Zach and Dave, it's when Roy is clearly not doing well. He's been oversleeping, he's almost late. If he doesn't leave now, he'll be late for school. And of course, the second he gets into the building, Zach and Dave are already making fun of him for almost being late. This speaks wonders on how their friendship dynamic is. The second they see him, they're already making fun of him, they're already putting him down, they're already doing things that make him feel negatively, even though they're supposed to be his friends who care about and love him. Although Roy doesn't see it this way. These people are the only actual friends he's had. He has nothing better to compare them to. He has no idea that real friends aren't supposed to do that to you. So obviously he sticks with them until later on. Later on, when you meet them again in the grocery store without them realizing and listen in on their conversation, they say that they are worried about hanging out with Roy because they don't want their reputation as popular kids to be ruined by hanging out with someone with such a reputation of being a weirdo. This also shows that they don't view Roy as an actual friend. They see him as more of a pity project that they're not willing to ruin their reputation over. And Roy obviously doesn't take this very well. I can't imagine many people would. And I think that just reflects on how much more Roy cared about this friendship than Dave or Zach did. It reminds me a lot of the saying, "The axe forgets but the tree remembers." To Roy, these people were his world. They meant a lot to him. But to Zach and Dave, he's just another person that they unfortunately have to spend time with. It's almost like older siblings with their annoying younger brother. They don't really want to spend time with him, but they feel like they're forced to, even though they were the ones that decided to be friends with him to begin with, as they state. In the first dream, Roy wakes up in this flower field. It's all dark. There's just a winding pathway forward. And this seems to be pretty reminiscent of how dark his headspace is at the time. Nothing but emptiness and a path forward, being as once you start walking, you can never truly go backwards in time. Which the game reflects by not letting you go backwards once you start walking forward. In the first dream, you meet Soul, who is this angel-like creature who seems to already know who you are. You find them sitting on a bench. They say the flower field wasn't always like this. It used to be relatively bright and sunny and very welcoming compared to what it is now, and that one day something happened that made this shift. My interpretation is that Soul seems to represent, well, Roy's soul, from their name and their appearance, as well as them already knowing who Roy is, and seemingly being in his headspace. Those all seem to be pretty key reasons as to why it could be believed that Soul is supposed to be reminiscent of some representation of Roy's inner consciousness trying to speak to him. Soul urges you to keep moving forward, partially because once you start walking, you can't turn back, and when you do, you are faced with this Omori style black and white kind of scribble world with puzzles. I won't really explain the puzzles, but there are these little scribble creatures that you can talk to that also seem to mention his inner consciousness, the choices he makes, and the choices that Dave and Zach made, and how they impacted him, and if they were really worth it to begin with. Reminiscent of Roy questioning himself if these people were really worth his time or being friends with. Once you complete all the puzzles, you find this grand piano, and Roy reflects over memories of his mother and father, specifically when he was a child and he learned how to play piano with his father on a thundering night, saying that once he started spending time with his father, he wasn't scared of the rain anymore, and how his absence impacted both him and his mother greatly, although in different ways. This is where we find out why Roy moved out to Blocks Hill, where he is now. It seems to me like this event has a really big impact on him and could most definitely be the reason why the flower field from before had quote-unquote gone dark. His father seemed to be his light, both literally and metaphorically, so when he passed away, it would make sense if this was the catalyst that caused it, along with his depressive state in general. Andy, meanwhile, seems to be a new beacon for him. In the third dream, the first actual dream instead of a nightmare, Soul talks to him in a sunny field now, talking about how, basically talking about how the right choices and the right people can make your life sunnier, and stuff like that. I won't really explain the whole conversation, because that's for you to find out. But Andy and Cloak being in his life, even if it was for a short period of time at first, seemed to genuinely change how he saw his world. Them wanting to be around him made him view himself as someone worth looking for, someone worth helping, someone worth keeping around, which Zach and Dave had made him feel quite the opposite of. It gives off sort of a good versus evil vibe in a way. When Zach and Dave are around, his world seems much more clouded, hard to manage, and all the more fuzzy. But when Andy and Cloak are now here, the world is visibly brighter. He seems to have a happier outlook on things, and he doesn't seem so down in the dumps. Hell, at this point, he even starts moving in a different way. His animation is less jittery, it's more calm, his walk cycle is a bit faster, although you really have to pay attention to realize he's walking and moving any faster than before. I just pay attention too much. um, Dave and Zach appeared in the first dream quite a lot. They weren't the center of the show, but they were definitely present, being as if they were a negative outlook in his life. But the second Andy and Cloak come in, they are the entire focus of his dream. Well, yes, it circles around him talking with Soul. At the end of the day, for the most part, the conversation circles entirely around how Andy and Cloak have affected his worldview and overall his mental state, being as it is much more positive now than it was before, which is honestly a nice stark contrast than it was before. He doesn't seem to have felt this way with anyone around since his father, and hopefully it continues to look up for him this way. Although the game so far is only these 3 small chapters long, it's still a work in progress, and hopefully more content will come out soon so we can dive a bit more into their dynamics and tie up some more loose ends, which I think would be very cool personally. I love this game. Um, I think it is beautiful storytelling wise. I think you should definitely check it out yourself. I think the visuals are gorgeous, and while it keeps that very classic retro look, the world around is beautiful, and it's definitely worth checking out. So I'll have a link to the game in my description, but let's look more into the characters personality-wise. I know we've talked a lot about Roy, and we'll get back to him more in a moment, but let's talk more about some of the characters around the map, and then we'll get back into our main characters. There's a character named Limey. He runs a lemonade stand by the school, and he's overall very friendly with Roy. If you talk to him on day 1 before school, he'll ask you if you want any lemonade, and when Roy says no, but he might be back later, Limey happily assures him that there's no need to rush, and he will always be there when Roy is looking for him. Which is honestly a big, comforting thing to hear for Roy. He's not used, even if it's in a very professional setting, he's not used to anyone saying that they'll be there for him, even if it's in a sense like this. Limey seems just genuinely happy to see him, and is one of the few characters that actually wants him to be around. They actually pay attention to him when he's speaking, and they don't take what he says as at face value. They actually see what he means past it and show genuine concern for him, which is refreshing compared to some of the other characters. And just as he promised, he's there on the first day after school, and you can buy lemonade from him, which I did because I love Limey. There's also Lewis, the older gentleman that runs the grocery store in town. He is always very quick to greet him and acts almost as a father figure for him, calling him by paternal nicknames and keeping an eye out for him. He's the first to tell Roy when he hears someone speaking ill about him and genuinely seems sorry that he has to break the news to him. He genuinely looks like he shows concern for him, and the next day after that if you talk to him after your interaction with Andy and Cloak, he gives you some advice about sometimes the right things will come to you, you just have to wait, saying that when he was a child, he was in a situation very similar to Roy, but now he has a best friend, a wife, and 2 kids, trying to show Roy that there is hope for him to have a better future. He just needs to wait a little while. That the right people will walk into your life if you wait long enough to let them. Which seems to make Roy feel a bit better, and honestly isn't that bad of advice. Sometimes you just need to wait for better things to come and live out through the bad. There's also Roy's neighbor. We don't talk to her much. We actually only really see her at the end of the third day after you talked with Andy and Cloak, showing that he seems to be paying attention more now. Other people just seem to fade into the background for him before. But he talks to her for the first time, and she genuinely asks him for his opinion on what he thinks of her garden, and wants his genuine, real opinion, which is a bit of shocking for him, being as he's never had anyone genuinely ask him what he thought of something. So when he really excitedly answers her question, she's very thankful for his. Yeah, sorry, I accidentally muted my mic. Um, she actually takes what he has to say into account, which is a pretty new experience for him, being as, like before, he never really paid attention to what anyone else. Because, whoa, nobody else had really paid attention to what he had to say before. So this is a very new experience for him. Now, let's take a bit of a look into Zach and Dave. Dave, the character who wears a pot on his head, weirdly enough, as much as he doesn't actually care for Roy, he seems to care about him a little bit more than Zach does. He's not as outwardly mean to him, at least to his face, and cares enough to actually invite him somewhere, although Zach questions if they should have. They seem to he seems to care a little bit more about not directly hurting his feelings and wanting him to feel included, although that is kind of for show. His behavior towards Roy to his face does make, compared to when it's just him and Zach, does make you wonder a little bit if he actually does care about Roy and is just treating him this way and acting this treating and acting bleh, acting like this and treating Roy this way because it's what Zach wants him to do, which could very well be the case, knowing that that is how it works sometimes in real life situations. Character B does not want to act like character A does, but does out of the fear of losing character B for not behaving the same way that they do. So while that does not make Dave's opinion, like actions, excusable, it does give a reason behind them, even if, although all things considered, it's not a very good reason. Um, Cloak, we'll get into him next. He is a actor at the local theater, so everything he does is very loud and dramatic and for extra flair, as he puts it. He's basically a walking theater performance, and that's how both he and his friends like it. He always gives a little extra dramatic flair and is very protective of his friends, which is something that Roy definitely needs in his life at this moment. He needs someone to lighten up the mood, to be the voice of the conversation, because Roy himself is very quiet, so he's not very used to talking much and doesn't have nearly as much energy as Cloak does, which is good. It balances him out. The three of them as a trio are actually pretty well balanced. They whoa, they all balance each other out particularly well. Andy is, although very talkative, he is much more calm than Cloak, while being a bit more rowdy than Roy. Meanwhile, Roy is much more quiet and closed in than both of them, acting as the listener of the trio. And Cloak is what amps up Andy as well, lifting everyone in the group's spirits while keeping his own personality other than just a clown or a goofy character. He's not just silly for the fun of it. He's silly because that's how he wants to be, not be because not because that's his expected role in the trio, which is a pretty good thing. It's nice to have a character keep their personality outside of their role in a group of people. Although it is equally interesting when a character does define themselves willingly outside of the narrative to their role when they are in a group. Though there's another character who we don't see yet, who I assume we will see in later chapters, named Archie. Archie is this alleged third member of Andy and Cloak's already established trio without Roy, although they intend to add Roy to this group, becoming more of a quad or a squad than just a trio with Andy, Cloak, and Archie. Archie is described as very nice and almost celestial-like by Andy, although immediately says he isn't a celestial, he just looks like from time to time. We haven't seen him at all, although I suspect he looks something like Soul, which he is described to look a bit like, at least with how they picture him compared to what Soul actually looks like. So I assume that Archie will not look too far off from some sort of angelic-esque character, being, like I said, as Andy does directly refer to him as looking like a celestial. So, unfortunately, we don't have much of the game currently. We just have these 3 days and the 30 dreams. But I think what we have now, even as an incomplete story, is a beautiful way to tell the story. It feels complete already, although that doesn't mean I don't hope they add more to it. But I do say that for what it is now, it does feel like a complete, for almost quote unquote first season, which it essentially is in this sense. And I'm excited to see what they do next, because I think it is a wonderful game. I've played it twice now, and both times it has like changed my brain chemistry. I love it. It is very dear to me, and I am very excited to see what they do with it next. And I hope this video gives you a reason to get really into it too. I don't really have much else to say other than it is a beautiful telling of a story basing on mental drainage and then recovery, learning more about yourself, what you can handle, and what the people around you really think about you, and how those relationships can affect your well-being. I think it is an excellent way to say that the people in your life can play a heavy part in your mental health, and honestly, it's just beautiful storytelling in general. I love how Roy is written, even right away, even as soon as he reaches one of the happiest points in his life, his personality doesn't just immediately change. He stays the same quiet, shy character he is, and it's not like his problems immediately erase. It's clear that he still has a lot of work to do on himself, but with the help of Andy and Cloak, he's willing to make that change. I don't have anything else to say, so just enjoy the last clip of me shading the drawing. I'm gonna tune out. Thank you for tuning in, but I'm gonna tune out. Love you all. Bye bye.